Right, everyone. Hello and welcome. This is the last session of the day, and myself and Bill will be presenting 4K and getting the most out of your 4K assets. Typically, this is the time when everyone's vitality is at its kind of lowest ebb, and your interest is waning. The projector broke. We're running late, so I'll really try and shorten things a little bit and just try and spin through this stuff as not so much as quickly as I can, but I'll just try and keep it brief and interesting if possible. So really, the 4K and beyond the hype topic, if you like, was us really revisiting the whole realm of 4K a year later, if you like. Last year, this time at Platform1, 4K workflows, Ultra HD workflows were something that a lot of people were looking at. It was on the horizon. But there wasn't a massive degree of engagement, and in fact, a lot of people were saying, do you know anyone that's actually working in 4K or Ultra HD? So the reality today is quite different. It's very firmly with us, and very much part of our landscape. So in terms of the format itself, it's something that comes under so many nomenclatures, under so many guises that it's worth just understanding very briefly what we're talking about. And having Phil, having just watched Phil's presentation, it just shows me how little I do know about digital video when I look at the quality and the depth and the knowledge of Phil's understanding and technically correct being the right kind of correct. I couldn't agree more. So I'm not quite as technically correct as Phil, I've got to hasten to add. But certainly what we're going to try and do is just try and give you a bit of a long view, an overview, a zoomed out view of where we are in the 4K landscape currently. And I guess one thing to note is that the whole notion of Ultra HD encompasses picture matrices right up to the so-called 8K size. And those are very much well beyond the realm of our discussion today, but certainly are pretty much encompassed within that specification and certainly that definition and that discussion point. So in terms of moving on from that, of just understanding there's a whole variety of effectively labeling and so forth that is applied to this, we can have a quick look and just at a glance, just have a quick reminder, if you like, about how much bigger and how much more there is just simple screen real estate there is to deal with as opposed to HD. And as Phil very much pointed out, there's a bunch of standards in play, and certainly a lot to think about and a lot to consider when working with this much larger canvas, this much more substantial image size and quality that you basically have to deal with. And in terms of really looking to speak to that, where are we really in this whole notion of working with 4K? Well, strictly speaking, in this whole notion of broadcast, and it's deliberately in inverted commas there's no real broadcast of 4K and Ultra HD in Europe as such, and indeed worldwide, outside of Japan, South Korea, France, and a couple of especially UK projects. That being said, only yesterday there was an announcement from BT, where they were going to look to providing an Ultra HD streaming service or an Ultra HD service to their subscribers via a BT Infinity connection, a new set-top box, and so forth. And what is really, I think, has come to the fore over the last year, and it's a trend that's been developing well before, is this whole notion of broadcast, which obviously we're not going to really seek to define within this session. But the notion of broadcast itself and what defines broadcast is very much change. And this whole notion of 4K effectively being used as a vehicle for streamed content, if you like, as opposed to broadcast content in inverted commas, is a dynamic that is really we see as a trend emerging very strongly at the moment. And certainly what it tends to be pushing through, and it's a very powerful dynamic in terms of pretty much overturning and skewing traditional models of serving content, and very much redefining the way rights holders deliver and effectively push and move and get their content to the end user. Several years ago, no one would have sort of considered or defined YouTube to be a broadcaster. Yet the number of views that are encompassed on that platform is sort of way beyond the realm and the dreams of many sort of traditional broadcasters. And the same goes for services sort of like Vimeo, like Netflix, and so forth. They're all sort of certainly coming to the fore, and coupled with high quality 4K as a sort of a compelling sort of delivery is something that is really changing the landscape of what we're about. So certainly a year later, this is very much a trend that we're seeing, and we're going to see it sort of very much sort of develop further indeed. So further to that, and again, bearing in mind sort of Phil's discussion earlier about the whole notion of, why in many cases SDI is better. This notion of stream content and with over the sort of the 4K services being delivered over the top is very much a trend that is again being brought in tandem, if you like, with the packetization of signals over sort of networks. So again, more and more you sort of hearing the notion of sort of IPTV and sort of IP video, and effectively delivery of effectively video as packets rather than as signals. And again, we're seeing it initially at the moment in terms of monitoring. We're seeing it in certain sort of delivery mechanisms. We're seeing it only in certain sort of places at the moment. However, again, this is a trend which we see very much one that is set to continue, and is one that is just going to increasingly become, part of this whole notion of the ITization, if you like, if there's such a word, of typical broadcast and delivery networks. So, really, again, looking at or breaking this down, there are three obvious stages in terms of the way 4K is effectively brought into our sort of realm. There's the sort of acquisition, ingest, or capture stage. There's post and editorial, and we've sort of included sort of live switching or live in inverted commas, and completion, sort of delivery and distribution. So, in terms of the acquisition side, in many cases, we've seen the rise of new cameras has very much continued without any sort of relenting in pace. And sort of at the nearest sort of ad hoc count that I did sort of recently, there are around about 30 odd cameras at least that shoot sort of 4K currently. And really over the last sort of year, we saw at least 3 or 4 new cameras as sort of new offerings from manufacturers that had not necessarily done cameras before. So certainly the appetite for people in terms of having new devices to acquire content from is certainly by no means nearly appeased. And typically what we often find, or certainly in the post side of things, which is sort of pretty much where I've sort of traditionally lived, one has no choice or has very little opportunity to steer the creative team, the DOP, the producer, with regards to a choice of the camera. Typically that footage will arrive to you having been sort of shot in some sort of arcane frame rate, because the DOP decided at that point it was a good and artistic idea. And pretty much post has to kind of, fix it in post has sort of never been more kind of, apparent. So with regard to, again, it's a trend that one might see sort of slowing at some point, but certainly don't be astounded or surprised even to sort of see more manufacturers coming out with more and more cameras, which I guess is one of these things where we've perhaps been used to the camera market being one that is developed a little slower than it currently is, but certainly we're sort of seeing changes really pretty much within a year, where previously it sort of took considerably longer. So given that sort of really we have no choice in terms of dealing with these, with the output of these devices, it's probably then good for us to have a peek, or just a reminder, if you like, in terms of what uncompressed data rates for these very large 4 times HD picture or pixel matrices sort of really look like. And as you can see, in terms of sort of if we're working with uncompressed footage, you're looking at some quite hefty data rates. And certainly, again, we've seen an approach from many post houses that they much prefer to adopt a uncompressed workflow, even though perversely sometimes material may have been originated from a compressed source. But the received wisdom being that in the post-production space, working in uncompressed would allow more freedom from processing artifacts and so forth. And generally, the sort of notion of working in uncompressed has been an argument and an approach that has been quite difficult to argue against in many cases with the chief engineer or the sort of post supervisors involved, because you're sort of pretty much fighting a bit of a losing sort of argument battle. But the reality of this is that we're not just sort of talking uncompressed SDI or even uncompressed HD anymore. We're sort of talking some very meaty data rates, and especially if you're working in a collaborative environment, you would definitely be in the realm of big iron. You'd be needing high-speed SANs, 10 gig, 16 gig fiber networks, very fast, very capable systems, simply to kind of get a picture up on the screen. And in terms of these data rates, we're talking at 24p rates here. We're not even kind of really going vaguely into the realm of HFR and talking about high, dynamic range also. So, up at that scale, things get pretty terrifying. But I think what this sort of serves to, what we're sort of really illuminating here is that the realm of the uncompressed is very much a niche area in the 4K space. Typically, people are going to be working, and typically the whole notion of working with sort of 4K data is one where the compression can really serve us well. And it's also one where compression is not the problematic notion that it used to be. Modern codecs do an absolutely stunning job of kind of creating very beautiful pictures at very relatively gentle bandwidths. And again, we would argue in terms of observing trends, it is the notion of compressed 4K which is really another substantial driver in this process to adoption of 4K general. It gives pretty much everyone the ability to manipulate 4K quality sort of compressed data that either in a raw format or one that's been sort of retranscoded to another intermediate codec. It really gives you the ability to manage and manipulate this content, store it for editorial, move it onto nearline, and effectively prosecute your editorial in the normal fashion that you would as if you were doing HD, but at 4K. So in terms of looking at trends, in terms of looking at drivers and things that are sort of pushing this along, it is very much something that we felt with in the 3D realm. Remember 3D? Where you felt it was something that manufacturers were really pushing at you, that they were kind of urging you to kind of go down this route. And I could almost sort of, we were discussing this earlier, I'm not quite sure if it's just me, but I could probably, count on the fingers of one hand the number of 3D films that I sort of thought were sort of quite and utterly extraordinary in terms of sort of what they gave. Whereas when you look at sort of the high image quality derived from 4K, the value, the beauty, and so forth, and the compelling nature of it is so immediately apparent. You don't sort of really need to make an argument for it. It is obvious. So, despite that being sort of a rather anecdotal response, perhaps, I think what we're sort of really trying to say is that the notion that you can kind of get very good results, that you can get very kind of capable, very sort of solid workflows in compressed environments is just an additional driver and a very strong aspect to the revolution, if you like, perhaps not the right word, to what we're sort of seeing at the moment. And as I mentioned, the emergence of sort of high quality codecs and indeed, in sort of renewed support from various manufacturers for intermediate codecs that are particularly our realm in post, that kind of really makes a big difference to this becoming not just a sort of the occasional sort of thing, but something that becomes far more feasible. Because as you can see, the data rates here is expressed by Avid's sort of 4K codec, their DNxHR. These in terms of data rates, are a lot more manageable in an environment. Now, obviously, if you're sitting in an environment and have an ISIS or shared storage environment where you've got people sort of pulling down, 111 megabytes odd per client, that is going to still place a substantial sort of burden on your network. But increasingly, you'll be working with perhaps a codec that is sort of running at somewhat well under that. And again, we're looking at we're effectively data rates in the realm of sort of compressed and in cases sort of uncompressed HD here. So again, feasible, doable, and as we were sort of discussing earlier with another one of our sort of clients, the transition to 10 gig Ethernet networks is another driver where, again, the infrastructure is supporting the ability for people to kind of work in this way and for 4K to be effectively dealt with as pretty much as easily as sort of HD was currently. So typically, you may choose to effectively finish a production in 4K, and you may even have a delivery requirement in 4K. But equally, in parallel, your content will be delivered to HD or even an SD source. Now, in many cases, that's a simple downscaled playout, or it is effectively a separate HD deliverable. But the reality is that although we're talking about sort of acquiring in 4K, posting in 4K, delivery is very much still in terms of delivery for broadcasters today, is going to be a HD deliverable and perhaps a 4K package on the side. There are a number of different approaches, and we'll explore these a little more later. But that is very much going to be the sort of the realm where we are. So, in terms of that, looking at the live ingest piece for a moment, it's a very different area, and this is where that's where the old difficulties, the old problems, very much come home to roost. We're not having the benefit of being able to kind of deal with a compressed codec format. We're having to deal with real-time video, and as sort of Phil mentioned earlier, what a lot of vendors are doing are adopting a quad HD approach in the interim, because given the fact that standards are very much still in flux, and given that a lot of things aren't set in stone, manufacturers haven't yet cemented their standards and their interfaces and their specifications in terms of what is going on. And quad is very much the quad HD is very much the realm of sort of where this is going to sort of work in a sort of a live context and environment. So a box, and again, sort of disclosure of interest here, we work with Rohde & Schwarz, and as Rupert sort of unashamedly sort of punted the old Spicer box earlier, I'm very much going to just simply do the same thing. But in terms of these contexts, the Rohde & Schwarz Venice box is a very capable field recorder. It'll basically ingest quad 3G, give us the ability to sort of manage ingest control. We have 4K monitoring, but also the ability to basically work with and get to a 4K file while it's being recorded for capture, for editorial, for packaging, and also the ability to basically work with, you would be working with the real-time HD if you wished, and there'd also be HD signal distribution. So Rohde & Schwarz have sort of previewed the box earlier this year, and we should hopefully see a delivery of that technology at around the sort of IBC timeframe. But really, one of their very big aims is to shorten the time between the file going into record and editorial actually getting to that content. So as you can see in the diagram, we've sort of effectively have sort of two files being made. The HD is worked on in the editorial process, and in terms of 4K, we can either sort of link back to that or send it off to the archive and sort of restore that later. There are a number of different workflows that will arise out of this, but certainly their approach is one that we firmly endorse. And in terms of the diagram we saw earlier, and Rupert this morning, I'm not quite sure how many of you were around when he was talking about the Spicer box. You can see that's sort of very much the cell rather that is very much sort of in the picture. In terms of playout, and again looking at sort of dealing with these scenarios in the very uncompromising world of real-time video, playout is very much a reverse, if you like, of ingest, where we can kind of get real-time managed, play-listed playout and monitoring from the box as a single box solution, providing a single stream of 4K out. In terms of working in these environments, as we've seen from a number of different vendors and manufacturers, and you've probably been involved in a number of different projects, it is a very uncompromising world right now. It requires a lot of planning. There's difficulty with interfaces, compatibility, formats, color space, you name it. There's basically a difficulty to be encountered. And certainly in terms of working within this realm, certainly the technology and the knowledge is certainly kind of approaching and proceeding at pace. So it is definitely something that we're going to see a lot more of, and it's going to be dealt with a lot more capably. So again, with the ability of hindsight, and a year on, there are a number of, back in the realm of sort of file-based workflows and file ingest, there are a number of new routes and tools available there for us to basically proceed with the business of kind of getting these camera cards into our systems with the ability to kind of get that stuff ready and processed for editorial. So Avid have shipped their Media Director package, which allows the automation and management, the auto ingest of material. Another vendor that we work with quite closely, NL Tech, have basically improved their auto ingest packages, and a number of third-party vendors have very much brought their game to 4K ingest. And in a sort of unashamed punt, our own content agent not only does a fantastic job at that kind of ingest and managed ingest, but also provides a managed sort of orchestration path for this content. So I think it's not just about effectively a transcode and getting the file in for editorial. There's sort of so much more to this process now, and that's sort of very much the realm that we are focusing on. So again, this is an example of a typical ingest process where you may have some metadata extraction happening, some metadata augmentation, a decision tree in terms of which files will go to different destinations, depending on what we're doing, some different quality derivatives, a check into interplay, and maybe even a push out to archive. Now, these are steps which you may have a team of operators carrying out, but we're increasingly working with automation and orchestration in Content Agent to allow these processes to happen as a single managed, automated and sort of reported workflow. And that's where it gets really interesting. And in tandem with this avalanche of 4K content that is approaching us, increasingly too is our need to meet that avalanche with a set of sophisticated tools and processes to manage and automate that material. So it's one, again, which you're going to see a trend that is going to be increasingly driven towards automation, process checking, and effectively, making this process a lot more manageable. Another development over the last year has been the sort of particularly one welcome to Avid editors, has been the sort of delivery of 8.3 with its ability to work with native 4K in the timeline. And for a number of our clients, this was the software delivery that basically enabled them to deliver 4K jobs for their clients to sort of, companies like Netflix and so forth. So the ability to simply sort of, AMA transcode material into a DNxHR flavor of their choice, add source side LUT, and effectively work with that sort of color space managed material in the timeline was something that, as one of our clients said, without that, they just wouldn't have been able to sort of deliver the job. And one sort of thing to note, though, is that most of these workflows sort of are currently sort of dealing with standard progressive frame rates. We're not sort of talking anything above sort of 60p at all. So although that side of things has really progressed, there are a lot of promises in terms of other aspects of this technology which are really just not there yet, is the consensus. That may not hold for too long in the future, but it's very much centered around those sort of standard progressive formats and frame rates. Another change was, or another development certainly, was in the transition to Ultra HD workflows, was really the interaction of third-party tools utilizing AEF as a primary interchange medium. Now, people have been using AEF for a long time, but it's certainly become more reliable. It's better supported by a lot of manufacturers, and one that is certainly our flavor of the month at the moment is the Bayside Editions plugin from Platform1. So it allows us to basically have access to a very high quality grading interface right in the Avid timeline, just as an AVX plugin. We can basically, apply shapes, grades. There's pretty much not much that you would require in a high-end grading suite that the Bayside Edition plugin can't do. But the really cool thing about it, and again, one of the big enablers for these 4K workflows and the grading in the timeline, and effectively allowing people to simplify their workflow pipeline, was this ability to basically then send an AAF and to interchange grade and shape data with the bigger Bayside systems. So, there are current post houses, not necessarily doing this in 4K so much, but certainly in HD, very much putting hours and hours and hours of material through their facilities a week using these sort of workflows. So don't hesitate to go and sort of see the Platform1 folks at the entrance and have a look at the Slate hardware, because again, it's one of these things, certainly in the Avid realm, that basically gave folks access to a highly sophisticated hardware surface that allowed them to sort of very quickly and very seamlessly work in a grading environment. So again, looking in retrospect, that has been a real big sort of change for us this year. So finally, getting onto the delivery piece, we've sort of seen, as you saw with Rupert's very comprehensive seminar earlier, that BCP, IMF, IMP sort of delivery formats and packages are very much the realm that this type of delivery is going. But as we've also seen, that doing this properly can be quite difficult, and kind of doing the same thing over and over and trying to figure out where you made a mistake is really not a sort of, it's not an uncommon scenario. So, and certainly anecdotally, a lot of our customers have sort of told us that effectively when they deliver a package or when they deliver a job to a client, typically they're giving them a folder of DPX, a QuickTime file, and an HD tape. So it just gives you an idea about kind of what the state of sort of the delivery mechanisms are in this space right now. So in terms of sort of, to sort of wrap up this sort of overview and a very much a sort of a quick sort of gallop through this sort of realm, we've seen that sort of distribution is, and monitoring is spectacularly cumbersome, particularly in the edit suite. Phil has given us a sort of a real insight into the challenges of sort of color fidelity, sync, and so forth. And certainly a lot of those elements, and certainly in terms of live production and so forth, are sort of real challenges. But equally, we believe there's a real interest and a real inertia behind sort of 4K, an Ultra HD, and it's definitely not going to be a sort of a transient fad. It is definitely here to stay, and we see it only becoming sort of bigger and better. So I'm going to basically wrap up and hand over to the mighty Bill in a minute. And just get if you give us a moment, I'll just get his presentation up, and then we can change over.
Right. Hello everyone. Good afternoon. As the last session of the day, I'll try not to keep you too long from whatever it is you've got to do or whatever club it is you have to visit next. But just to quickly reintroduce myself, my name is Bill and I work in Route 6 Technology, on the content agent product. So we're spending a lot of our time also in investigating new UHD technologies and workflows around that. So this morning we sort of looked at file-based delivery methods, how they're implemented, what the changes have been. And this afternoon I'd just like to take a deeper dive into 4K UHD, chiefly how it affects our visual system, so a bit of science behind that, and some of the technologies that enable us and support it with that. So setting the scene, what do we really define as UHD beyond just some more nice pixels, if you please? And what does it give us in turn for those nice pixels? We're sort of in a unique period of flux and being able to move from very old legacy SD and below systems all the way, through up to UHD and very exciting new technologies. So how can we enable that? And then what are the compression technologies behind that supporting it, and how can we leverage those in ways that perhaps we might not be aware of? And ultimately at the end, how can we tie it all together so it's not a complete pain to handle? So again, this has been covered in numerous scope today, so I'll just very quickly touch through it. But beyond bigger frames, we are, first of all, we're working with high resolution images. So we're looking at, and there's a lot of sort of confusion with the nomenclature, but UHD TV will give us 2160 line and 4320 line, and then we have different rasters for CMAR, as I'm sure you know. But alongside that, and to support the enhanced resolution perception that we get from those higher resolution frames, we need to think about higher frame rates that go alongside that and support that and enhance our viewing pleasure as well. There's a lot of problems that are caused by larger resolution that higher frame rates will solve. And then beyond that, the higher dynamic range to go with it. And I'll explain why that's important when we're looking at larger resolution images. Fortunately, as someone who's pretty colourblind, that's rather lost on me, but there we go. So, one of the things, obviously, it gives us is increased spatial resolution. So, what we get from this ultimately boils down to the fact that the human eye, as an optical system, is pretty poor at picking up localised high-frequency variations in an image. What it's very good at is detecting subtle brightness variations over a large area, and it's why we're sensitive to things like banding, blockiness as a human. So if we can give us more samples over that same area, it allows us to define in our visual system with more depth a nicer brightness curve, which is much more pleasing to view as a human. Equally, this makes a big difference when we're adding things in like effects, and sort of by effects I generally mean any sort of intermediate coding that you would do as part of the post-production process. So there's a lot to be gained from that increased spatial resolution, and that's something that this point it often boils back to, brings a lot of UHD technologies back to this point as to why they make a difference in that simple fact and as a broader compression topic. And we're helping to avoid things like this. It can happen at all resolutions, but if you're on the ball, you'll know this is your Moira pattern, which essentially occurs when a scene or object is being shot, contains a repeating pattern or repetitive details that exceed the sensor resolution. So there's a formula you can use, the Nyquist frequency, to work that out. And that aliasing is often worse when the frequency of the pattern is close to the sampling frequency. So we could use an anti-aliasing filter, but that's going to soften our image and it's going to blur it out. So if we can increase the sampling resolution, then we're not going to have to suffer that softness. So that's great. We've got increased spatial resolution, but with our HFR, we've also got increased temporal resolution. So as I sort of alluded to earlier, UHD frame sizes bring up a whole set of new problems, or they're problems that still exist in HD frame sizes, but they augment problems. So with those high frame rates, with things like flicker and judder and smear, is something that we can reduce, and those problems manifest themselves much more obviously at larger frame sizes. So by judder, I mean a perceived uneven or jerky video playback arising from a movement of objects or detail from one frame to the next. Smear when we have objects moving too quickly that appear to smear across the background for the temporal resolution that we're sampling in our frame rate. So we've got an example there. And that itself has already been a problem at HD TV. There's been quite a few trials of HD TV where viewers have reported motion sickness and unpleasant effects where they get a big difference between still shots and moving shots like in sport, and the blur unsettles them, causing them a few issues. Equally, we're sort of having to convert between a lot of traditional frame rates. So if we're acquiring very high frame rate content that we're taking back into the traditional frame rate domains, our 1080, i50, or 60, or whatever, things are going to look very jerky if we just take those frames and don't interpolate properly. So there's quite an art now in taking high frame rate content and applying a suitable motion blur to the correct objects in that image so that it looks natural when played back at a suitable resolution. So resizing and rescaling images, we're now in sort of quite a unique period of flux, and moving between them all presents quite a set of unique challenges. As I say, we're going from SD rasters all the way up to UHD, and being agile in our workflows is something that we try and promote and something that we try and offer in the content agent product. So not having to tweak your workflows based on frame rate size or think, all right, this is that raster, so I need to apply this setting. Being able to have a workflow which is flexible and understands those, and it's an operational problem as much as an engineering one. So this might be slightly obvious, but things to be aware of when we're moving in that unique period of flux between larger resolutions, smaller resolutions, and back up. So obviously scaling brings in all sorts of aliasing problems that I'm sure you will be aware of, and I've sort of alluded earlier as to why the frequency issues, as to why that occurs. Now there are lots of algorithms that are employed to sort of enhance that process and give a better quality in our downscale. There's quite a lot of people, some productions are mandated to use them, and other people aren't convinced they make a difference. So just as a sort of illustration of the differences of some of the algorithms that people are using and how they affect our downscale. Now, I'm not sure we can really see that on a projector with those optical properties, but here we go, let's give it a go. So this is our test image here, and what we're trying to do is resize it down so it fits in this red box. We want detail all the way up to the edge of the red box, but then we don't want any detail afterwards. So any information outside this red box has been incorrectly interpolated. So nearest neighbour is what you will get in systems that need to, like on computer systems, that need to just quickly resize images, for displaying a user an error message or something. And that just takes the next nearest pixel and interpolates to that. Bicubic is a more complex algorithm, and what that does is this is the sort of algorithm you find in sort of products like Photoshop as standard that they use when resizing images. And obviously it's done a much better job, but you can see there's still a bit of stuff, and you can see some circles sort of around the outside that have been incorrectly interpolated. Now Langsource sort of leads the way as the quality algorithm that people are using, and here you can barely see anything. It's not quite obvious on this projection, but essentially we're sort of mapping our samples to free-kernel sync function. So we get a much better interpolation, and even productions are required to mandated to use these different algorithms. So they do make a difference, and having a product which can leverage all of them is definitely advantageous. Equally, film texture and image texture is something that gets forgotten when resizing. So not just film grain, digital noise as well, something that's inherent in all images. And some traditional resizing solutions can just grab that noise and blow it up and pull it out with it, so that undesirably resizing that image texture, and it doesn't really look natural. Some other products will remove that image texture, but they might not add it correctly in a way that looks natural, or they might just dump in a load of wideband noise or something that doesn't really make sense in that environment. So having a solution which can remove that texture correctly, but then re-add it as well is important. So that's why we've plugged in with a product called Dark Energy, or an algorithm called Dark Energy, as part of the content agent transcoding pipeline. So we already use their tachyon algorithm, and you may have heard us talking about that. Alchemist quality frame rate conversion that a number of people are using now, from BT Sport to BBC Sport to like digital cinema as part of content agent. And this allows very similar scaling, but it's also texture aware, so it's some of the best and most trusted texture handling software and algorithms in the marketplace right now. So we can automate and scale between a lot of those frame rates and frame sizes while handling the texture correctly as well. And again, something that really doesn't relay well on this projector, but we can sort of see some macro blocking stuff that we can smooth out, for example. And if you want to have a proper look, come and find me after and I'll show you some decent samples. And again, as I say, we can denoise and renoise and re-add the texture in the same way. So even though there are products out there which will add a certain set texture, what we're doing here is, in time and space, we are interpolating a uniquely random but tailored noise and grain texture that we can embed into the image that gives it a much more natural look when you up-res it, and this will help with things that traditionally are probably like banding, blocking, and stuff. And again, you don't have to be changing image size. You can be using things like GoPro and stuff, and that again helps a lot with denoising and cleaning up the image. You can, again, not so clear on this projection, but you can sort of see this dude's arm here. It's not as nice as the car shadow here, and this is fairly obvious to see. One of the last things as well that it's very good at is, and this again doesn't relay well, but it's increasing compression performance. So adding a subtle amount of noise for compressing an image can really help. So this is the same, using the same encoder, a compression to 20 megabit per second H.264. On the left-hand side, we haven't applied any noise before, and what you actually get is a smear. This is a picture of the Eiffel Tower, and you can't see any of the railings or whatnot. If you look here, by applying that noise, which we've done in this compression, you can see much more detail in the railings, and you get an overall clearer image, and there are other examples of where this is done. And this is due to us being able to shift the energy compaction of a DCT codec, and we can talk about that more in a moment. So there's a lot more beyond sort of resizing and readjusting frames and what we need to think about. And this is, again, all made possible by certain compression technologies, and there's quite a number sort of throwing their hat into their ring. Different horses for different courses. Just some of the ones we're going to focus on today are JPEG 2000 Red and XHR and ProRes. So used for fundamentally different things, but both very interesting in their own way. So if you're into your sort of image analysis or image compression, you will know that JPEG 2000 and Red are both wavelet-based compression schemes. So whereas a lot of the compression schemes that we use these days look over regular areas for a number of patterns, what we're doing here is looking over whole frames for localized patterns. So it's very computationally intensive. We're holding entire frames in memory rather than macro blocks and whatnot. But it brings huge benefits when you want to look at decoding and workflows and how we can handle it. We see lots of people sort of struggling with it in the wrong way. So the whole point of a wavelet transform really is that you can encode it once, but you can decode it in many ways that suit it to you. So what we're essentially doing is using, so if we take this as our image, we're filtering it in two directions. So we're doing two high filters in the X and Y axis, a low and a high filter, low and a high filter in the other axis, and a low and a low filter. And we can gradually iterate that through the low and the low filter to get a smaller image with less detail. each time. So we're using finite impulse response filter there to go through that. And what that enables us to do, so we've got a tiled image now, which is transformed into a bit stream. What that gives us is the ability to decode it many ways. So if I've got a JPEG 2000 or red asset and I want to make some proxy, I can tell my decoder to only decode a very filtered version of that, or the top quartile there. And that'll give me a smaller frame size and my proxy. Or I can stretch it out, have it at the same frame size, but as a lower quality with less detail. Maybe I want an HD version or something. Then I can take some of that again, and I can significantly reduce the decoding time while making it suit my purpose. And if I want the whole thing, then I take the whole thing. And this process is not very computationally intensive at all. We just had to truncate the bit stream where we want it. And we see lots of people that are taking full, native wavelet rasters, and they're using traditional downscaling methods, which are incredibly complex to get back to that proxy size when actually they could only be taking a fraction of the encoded image. And lots of products don't allow you to leverage this, but this is something that we actually like to allow you to leverage in content agent by getting your hands into some of the decoding. So what you can do is take an incoming JPEG 2000 or red asset, and we've got a number of people like LTV Manchester and HBO using content agent in this way. You want your full res, you can debear that at full resolution. And if you want your proxy, you can go and take and bake in a lot, perhaps, while you're doing it. And I mean, the difference is stark here. We're talking while you're waiting for this to get in a big image, a 4K image raster, maybe half real time. This can be coming in at 40 or 50 frames a second, ready for you to start your edit with down here. So you don't need to sort of take a long time decoding your proxies and having to downscale using traditional methods. The tools are already in the compression methods to allow us to do that. So one of the other ones I just want to touch on is ProRes and the new sort of DNxHR, which is just an extension to the SMPTE standardized version of DNx BC3. So in contrast, the sort of antithesis of a wavelet transform, these are DCT transforms. So we're looking over a regular area of our images for a fixed number of frequencies. So ProRes is predefined at any frame rate, and actually DNxHD as well, and DNxHR have never had any frame rate defined. The only reason they've ever been frame rate defined is how they're implemented in Avid and how they're marketed, essentially. So these can run at any frame rate. All they're specified and designed in is a number of bytes per frames, and that defines our DNx220 or our DNx36 or whatever. So we're resolution independent up to 16K by 16K now with DNxHR, which is 1024 macro blocks by 1024, nice square number. And at higher bit rates, these are actually virtually visually lossless. And key to why we use them in the post-process is they survive multi-generational compression well, and they're computationally unintensive. So to give you an idea of how simple they are to implement, and this is no bad thing, the H.264 specification, which is a hugely complex specification for a hugely complex codec, runs at well over 600 pages. The DNxHR and the VC3 one runs at about 100, which 50 pages is just lookup tables. So it's a really stark difference, much easier to implement. And the real magic behind why these codecs work so well in post is this little block up here. So for the uninitiated, this is a DCT wavelet table. So what we're doing is taking our block of pixels and trying to work out, and these are just individual frequencies we might get in our image, how the proportion of each of these individual frequencies in our image. Now, if we think back to what we said earlier, the human eye is really good at noticing subtle brightness variations over large areas, and that is this here, the DC coefficient, which makes up much of the base hue of the image, and the remaining 63 coefficients, or AC coefficients, so DC or AC from electricity. Sorry. So And the advantage of the DCT is it's got great energy compaction, and what it tends to do is focus those frequencies down into the ones that we're particularly good at noticing, and then we can quantize accordingly. So these are the ones we're least sensitive to, and you'll notice this is the weight by which how we're going to get rid of them. This here show the strength at which how we're going to get rid of them. And the only one that we're not going to quantize at all, and this is special, not many codecs do this, apart from PROS and DNX, is we're not going to quantize that DC coefficient. So we're keeping all of the information about that base U. And that means it survives multi-compression very well, which is why we can composite effects on it very well, transcode it numerous times with little to no effect. And it also handles things like banding, etc. Very well. So sort of raise, fills, Rec 709 card space conversion of the nice matrix there. We'll see who's one later. So there's a very brief look at what you get. So on the left you get what we've got existing, so our DNX HD, and it gives you an idea of the combinations, bit depths and such you can use all the way up from RGB, looking at 444 DNX, down to our thin rasters and our low bandwidths, which are here for DNX 36 and whatnot. And we've now got this resolution independent one, so you work out the frame size of these with a predefined equation in the SMPTE standard, and we can scale these according to our need. So one of the other things that the DNX HR and the VC3 extension gives us that ProRes has had for a long time, and essentially makes DNX HR ProRes in all but name, they're very, very similar codecs, is the ability to do variable bitrate mode. So if you were working in a traditional DNX HD workflow or something, if we took something which compresses really nicely, like color bars here, you do your transform, and a lot of the patterns that repeat in your image are the same. So you can make short work of using what's called a Huffman table to make code words for that, and it's sort of like it's a code, and you can say, like 31s in a row, I'll just call the letter A instead or something together. Now something like this, the Huffman tables make pretty short work of. So if we were using traditional DNX HD frame, we put in our encoded image payload, and then we literally put in empty data to make up our frame size that gives us our constant bitrate. And sort of from experience, especially at things like DNX 185 and above, a lot of the frames that you'll be passing through your encoder and decoder will have some form of padding in and will be lossless. And sort of the difference between the good DNX codecs and the bad DNX codecs is assigning more bits to the DC coefficients. And so if you have a poor implementation of a DC coefficient of a DNX encoder on sort of black backgrounds and stuff, you'll notice blockiness and stuff because it hasn't calculated this empty space correctly and said, you know what, DC coefficient have a few more bits to make my image look a bit nicer. So with our VBR mode, this is gone, this requirement's gone, and this gives us obviously much more flexibility in the workflow, and we can save some space in our image. So those are sort of the headlines about what you get with DNX HR and why it's good news for everyone in post, particularly in an avid environment. But how do we tie it all together? So, and I will sort of go through this quite quickly as we've already talked about the implications, but with Contination we try and allow you a resolution agnostic way to automate workflows to, from, and in between 4K and UHD content. So all you need to be concerned with is what you're getting on output. You don't need to tell it, oh, this is a 4K, this is a SD, adjust it accordingly unless you want to. And this sort of ties in quite well with the changes in operational practice we feel, as well as engineering practice. And with that, you can still automate seamlessly all the standard functions you were using Content Agent for before. And just a few of the situations that people have put into use with Content Agent is 4K camera ingest. So things like RED, XAVC and things like that, they can have the same workflow that they've got for ingesting their standard XD cam or whatnot. And being able to create those linked proxy clips alongside that and tie them together in an Avid workflow or in other workflows with metadata and our metadata engine makes a really powerful editorial workflow. whether they want to stitch them together, have them as individual clips. And we also launched recently a product called Card Agent, which essentially allows access to all these workflows, but with a really easy and simple to use user interface that they can deploy in many places around one central content agent system. So this allows those same workflows easy access, and you can walk up, plug in my camera, make a few operations, do a few selects, give my card a name, play it back, trim it up, do a quick logging session, and then I can ingest it through that workflow. And we've got journalists using that, all sorts, but through really complex content agent workflows with a number of steps. Equally, you can do a number of 4K deliveries with content age as well, and we have people delivering everything from JPEG 2000 to TPX, XAVC, and again, upscaling using that pipeline, existing HD content through for UHD delivery, and just to name drop a few of the people that have trusted content agent with their beautiful UHD content, one day. This is it. So if that's something you're interested in, please do come and find us and we can talk through some workflows for you. And I think I'm the last one, so thank you.